The clinking of glasses and low murmur of a string quartet blended into the grandness of the ballroom at the Palmer House Hotel. I'd been watching from near the back, half hidden behind a giant vase of lilies, when everything screeched to a halt. A voice, high-pitched and cracking with disbelief, cut through the laughter like a blade. "Wait, is that her on the news?" Every head in the room whipped toward the two massive screens flanking the dance floor. They were meant to cycle through childhood photos of my brother Blake and his new bride. But instead of a grinning teenager in a tux, a harsh red banner pulsed across the screen. Special report. In that instant, I saw my father, Tom Carter, freeze in place, champagne flute hovering in midair, his mouth still curled into the beginning of a smile. His world, built on deals and bravado and the spotlight, suddenly felt very small. But less than an hour before, he'd been the king of this room. Tom Carter, the most charismatic car dealership owner in all of Chicago, master of ceremonies at his only son's wedding. To my family, to this crowd of polished aunts and boastful uncles, he was a legend, the man who could sell anything to anyone. Tonight, he was celebrating Blake's new life, the golden son, the future business partner, the kid who'd never disappointed him. And me? I was the afterthought in a navy blue bridesmaid dress, quiet, careful, and mostly invisible. I glanced at the table where my mother, Joan, was talking animatedly with two distant relatives. I could read her lips, even from here. "Blake's so successful, you know. He's running the Michigan Avenue showroom now." She never spoke about my work. Not really. To them, I was the government girl, stationed in Washington, doing a something air with the military. They couldn't pronounce my job title, let alone understand what it meant. My dad tapped his glass with a fork, that performative smile locked in place. "I just want to raise a toast," he boomed, his voice rolling across the ballroom. Blake and his wife smiled and blushed as everyone cheered. My father basked in their adoration. He lifted his glass. "To Blake, the best of us. To Sarah, who is now officially family. And, of course." His gaze found me. A flicker of something, maybe irritation, maybe indifference. And my daughter Madison, always the mysterious one. A pause. "She works for the government, down in DC. Honestly, I think she just cleans up after the SEALs." He tossed out the line, expecting the usual ripple of laughter. It came, polite but honest, filling the space between toasts and applause. I could feel eyes on me, curious, slightly mocking. The weird daughter. The one who moved away. The one who missed birthdays and Christmases and didn't fit into the neat family narrative. Captain Walter, a retired Navy officer and an old friend of my dad's, caught my eye from across the room. His look was more pity than amusement, and it stung more than the laughter. This wasn't new. It was just the public version of every family dinner where my career was a punchline, every story about my clearance level that ended in a shrug. When I was 16, my dad took Blake car shopping, bought him a used BMW for his birthday, and spent a month telling the story to anyone who'd listen. When I got into Annapolis, he told people, yeah, Maddie's doing some military stuff. Not sure why a girl wants that, but hey, she's always been stubborn." My achievements were footnotes. Blake's were headlines. I stared down at my hands, hidden in the folds of my dress. I squeezed until my knuckles turned white, but outside I didn't move a muscle. The humiliation didn't even burn anymore. It was colder now, something I'd learned to freeze away after years of this. Dad thought he was telling a joke, harmless, maybe even affectionate. But what he didn't realize was that every jab only confirmed a decision I'd made long ago. I would stop trying to explain my world to them. I would let my work, and the truth, speak for itself. They had no idea the recleaning AI did was scrubbing through encrypted comms at 3 in the morning, piecing together signals that could avert disasters. They couldn't imagine me behind a wall of screens, tracking digital whispers across continents, holding the line between order and chaos while they slept peacefully in their Chicago high-rises. To them, my life was a blurry photograph. To me, it was the only thing that made sense. And at this wedding, for just a moment, the two worlds, the bright, simple world of my family, and the shadowed, high-stakes world I lived in, were about to collide. And nobody here, especially not my father, was ready for that. The laughter from my father's joke about my government job was still echoing around the room when I glanced at my brother. Blake was beaming, arm around his new wife, nodding along with every toast as if this entire night had been orchestrated just for him. And in a way, maybe it had. He was the kind of person everyone loved, smart, athletic, the quarterback in high school, homecoming king, and, later, the natural salesman who could charm anyone into signing the dotted line. Dad had started grooming Blake for the family business as soon as he could drive. By junior year in college, Blake was already learning the ropes at Carter Automotive, closing deals at the table while I was halfway across the world tracking pirate radio signals off the Horn of Africa. It always amazed me how easily my accomplishments evaporated around these people. When I'd finished top of my class at Annapolis, my mom sent a polite text, as so proud, honey. When Blake landed a promotion at the dealership, there was a dinner, a cake, a speech from Dad, and a half-page ad in the Chicago Tribune. At every family gathering, the comparisons were subtle but ever-present. Madison's off in D.C. doing her secret work. Blake's bringing real money and a beautiful wife into the fold. But it wasn't just about money. It was about being understood. In my world, success was measured in silence, in warnings issued, attacks prevented, lives saved by the absence of disaster. In theirs, success was loud, shiny, and always just a little bit self-congratulatory. Tonight, I felt more invisible than ever. It kept making his rounds, laughing big and loud, spinning old stories for the uncles and aunts, talking up Blake's new house in Lincoln Park. Every so often, someone would catch my eye and offer a polite nod. I became an expert at small talk. A yes, DC is nice in spring. Or a no, I can't really talk about my job. A yes, Blake is doing great, isn't he? It was a skill I'd honed over years of living two lives. Sometimes, in moments like this, I wondered if there was ever a bridge between those worlds. After dinner, as the guests drifted toward the dance floor, Dad found me. He was already a little tipsy, tie loosened, suit jacket off, his face flushed from the bourbon and the attention. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders, squeezing a little too tight. Maddie, there you are. Hiding in the shadows, as usual. He said it with a grin, but I could feel the judgment beneath the surface. Everyone's talking about Blake, but hey, you're the one-off in DC, right? High security, all those secret missions? Or is it just laundry for the big shots? He chuckled, but his words landed heavy. Dad, I started, but he was already looking past me, waving to a group of cousins. I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. Brown hair pinned in an elegant updo, understated makeup, posture straight as a ruler, all those years of discipline. But inside, I felt like a shadow, always present, never really seen. As I watched him go, I remembered last Thanksgiving. My mother had cooked for days, the house filled with the scent of sage and turkey. Blake had arrived with Sarah, his fiancée, glowing and triumphant. Dad paraded Blake's recent dealership award around like it was the Nobel Prize. At dinner, there were toasts to Blake, stories about his sales numbers, and promises of the future of Carter Automotive. I'd said I'd been promoted at work, a division lead, intelligence analysis. They'd nodded politely, confused, then changed the subject. I learned, over time, to compartmentalize. At work, I was a leader, trusted, part of something vital. At home, I was the oddity, the afterthought, the girl who never quite fit the Carter family mold. But it wasn't just me. My mother, always trying to keep the peace, never truly defended me, just offered thin smiles and words like, let your father have his moment. She loved us both, I knew, but her love was wrapped in compromise. I used to wish, desperately, that they'd ask, really ask, about what I did. But if they did, could I even answer? Most days, my work was a blur of classified files, maps of shipping routes, intercepted signals, threat matrices. I spent hours in rooms with no windows, decoding fragments of information that could save a ship, a city, or the lives of people who would never know my name. That was my world. This, tonight, was theirs. As I stood by the mirrored wall, watching the swirl of dancers and listening to the faint beat of the DJ's pop song, I realized something had shifted inside me. I was tired of being the family's inside joke. I was tired of being invisible. But change, real change, was coming. And none of them, least of all my father, had the faintest idea how close it was. A ballroom can feel like a coliseum when you're the odd one out. As I stood there, letting the laughter and music roll over me, I found my thoughts drifting, not just to the awkwardness of the moment, but to the invisible boundary between the life my family imagined for me and the life I actually lived. If you'd asked anyone at that wedding, even my mother, what I did in Washington, the answer would be a shrug. She's with the Navy, I think. Works with some kind of computers. She doesn't talk about it much. To them, my world was a foggy mystery, a half-joke about black ops and secret squirrel stuff. But to me, it was painfully real, a constant, humming tension under my skin. I didn't choose military intelligence because I wanted to hide. I chose it because someone needed to see what others missed, the anomaly in 1,000 pages of intercepted chatter, the pattern behind seemingly random movements on a digital map. It wasn't glamour. It was patience. It was responsibility, weight, and the kind of purpose that rarely fit into family dinners. I remembered my first real mission, a decade ago, right out of Annapolis. It was a January night colder than anything I'd ever felt, the Potomac frozen along the edges as I crossed a bridge toward the Pentagon. There were 10 of us in a room, staring at lines of code, silent but for the occasional tap of a keyboard. We were hunting something no one else believed was real, a ghost, a signal embedded in a sea of routine traffic. That was the night I earned my call sign, Echo. A name that followed me everywhere in the building, a name that meant respect among people who mattered, even if my own family couldn't pronounce it. I was good at this job. No, I was great. I had the instincts for it, the stubbornness, the unbreakable attention to detail. And I had the discipline, forged in all those Carter family nights where I learned to hide disappointment and smile at jokes made at my expense. Back at the wedding, the DJ switched tracks to a slow dance. Blake led Sarah onto the floor, looking like every magazine ad for suburban success. Dad cheered, raising his glass again, always at the center of the noise. I let myself fade into the crowd, slipping out onto a side balcony just to breathe. The winter air was sharp, stinging my lungs. From up here, the lights of downtown Chicago looked distant, almost like another world. I checked my phone, habit, always, and found a message flashing on my secure app. It was simple. Nightfall is go. Assets clear. Pentagon briefing at 2300Z. No names, no signatures. Just the confirmation that everything I'd been working on for 3 weeks, all the tension, the lost sleep, the classified headaches, was about to go public. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the news settle. 2300Z, that was 6 p.m. here. Right in the middle of this reception. Of course it was. This is the part no one understands about military life, the way your world can shift in a heartbeat, how you have to carry both realities at once. 1 minute you're a bridesmaid. The next, you're the lead analyst on a national security event that could alter global strategy. And you're supposed to smile through it all, answer questions about the weather, and pose for family pictures. I texted back. Acknowledged. That was all. Then I slipped back inside, retaking my place at the edge of the party, blending in, smiling at a little cousin who asked if I wanted cake. But beneath the surface, adrenaline was humming. I couldn't help glancing at the screens, counting down the minutes until the reception would be interrupted by a reality none of these people could have predicted. When my father spotted me again, he pulled me into another conversation with Uncle Jack and Aunt Renee. Madison here, she's the real mystery in this family. He grinned, elbowing me playfully. Maybe one day she'll tell us what she actually does, right, Maddie? I smiled, polite as ever. Maybe one day, Dad. I'd learned long ago that the details didn't matter to them. If I said too much, it would sound like bragging. If I said too little, it confirmed the narrative. Maddie's just different. Uncle Jack chuckled. Hey, as long as you're happy, kiddo. But you could always come back to Chicago, you know. There's a spot for you in the business. Aunt Renee nodded. We need more Carters around here. Especially women. Give these boys some competition. I thanked them, deflecting as always. They meant well, but I didn't belong in that world of commissions and car sales. I belonged in the in-between, the world of secrets and systems. As the clock ticked closer to the hour, I could feel the pressure building. Every joke, every well-meaning question, every memory of being the odd oney in the Carter clan, it was all about to collide with the truth, live, on national TV. I caught my own reflection again. There was resolve in my eyes. A quiet strength. And for the first time all night, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was exactly where I needed to be. By the time the main course was cleared and the band shifted from jazz standards to wedding classics, my mind was already somewhere else. My family, meanwhile, remained trapped in the familiar orbit of old stories, sales numbers, and safe nostalgia. Dad laughed big and loud at the head table, recounting how he once sold a Cadillac to a Bears linebacker who didn't realize it was used. Mom nodded along, glancing at me with a half-smile that asked, "Are you all right?" I gave her my practiced look, pleasant, unreadable, the kind of face I wore in every debriefing room in DC. I tried to lose myself in the noise, but my senses were stretched tight as tripwire. I noticed everything, the way the photographer shifted from group to group, the anxious way Sarah, Blake's wife, watched her new family, even the subtle hum of the PA system as the screen cycled through Blake's baby photos. But underneath it all, I was bracing for the moment when those screens would go dark and my real life would crash into this one. I found a moment alone in the coat room, breathing deep, replaying the last 3 weeks in my head. It had been a grind. 17-hour days, meals eaten at my desk, sleep coming in fractured, dreamless bursts. We'd picked up a ghost signal off the coast of the Philippines, dismissed by others as background noise. But I'd seen the pattern. With Commander Ross at my side, we chased it through terabytes of data until it became clear. This wasn't static. This was a threat, a digital prelude to something much bigger. My job was to see what others missed, and in that world, I mattered. There were no jokes about a cleaning for the SEALs in those rooms. There, I was Echo, not the odd one, not the disappointment, but the hunter, the one who soared through the storm. But as the wedding spun on, my role shrank back to the background. People talked over me, about me, but never to me. My brother and his friends relived college stories and dealership victories. Cousins planned a summer trip to Miami. I floated through the night, invisible, listening, waiting. When dessert came out, my mother appeared at my elbow, concern etched across her face. "Madison, are you sure you're all right? You seem far away." Her voice was low, careful, as if not to disturb the fragile balance of celebration. I almost told her. I almost said, "Mom, I'm exhausted. I've been running on adrenaline for days. I'm waiting for the Pentagon to drop a briefing about an operation I led." But I knew better. Instead, I just smiled. "Just tired, Mom. It's a big night." She patted my hand, eyes softening, but didn't press further. She was always the buffer in our family, smoothing conflict, patching over my father's rough edges, loving fiercely but quietly. Sometimes I wished she would raise her voice, just once, and call Dad out for his constant jokes, but that wasn't her way. Back at the table, I caught a snippet of Dad's conversation with an old dealership buddy. "My girl's in DC now. Real cloak and dagger stuff, you know? I tell her, just don't get lost in those tunnels under the Capitol." They both laughed. He never missed a chance for a punchline. I checked my watch again. The moment was coming. When I'd first told my parents I was joining Naval Intelligence, that had tried to be supportive, but couldn't resist a quip. "You'll make a great secretary for some admiral." At the time, I laughed along. I wanted his approval so badly it hurt. Now, years later, I realized he wasn't joking as much as he was defending himself from a world he didn't understand, a world that no longer revolved around him. My phone buzzed in my clutch, a short, encrypted message. "Stand by. Feed in 5. Suddenly, the lights dimmed. The MC's voice came over the speakers, calling for everyone's attention for the big photo montage. I felt my heart pounding as I watched the screens flicker, the slideshow pausing mid-image. A hush fell. The usual chatter dissolved into a strange, expectant silence. Then the screens went black. A new image appeared, a news anchor, face serious, voice urgent. "This is a special report from NBC News." People turned, confused, glancing at each other. Dad frowned, glass halfway to his lips. Blake looked back at me, puzzled. The anchor's words cut through the quiet. "Tonight, the Pentagon has announced a major breakthrough in Operation Nightfall, an ongoing intelligence mission in the South China Sea. Officials report an imminent threat to U.S. Navy assets was detected and neutralized due to the actions of a covert team of analysts and operators. A ripple of disbelief moved through the crowd. My father's face drained of color. The feed shifted. A live shot from a Pentagon briefing room. Behind the Admiral at the podium, unmistakable in her Navy dress uniform, was me. Not a ghost. Not a joke. Not an afterthought. The girl they never quite understood, now 10 feet tall on a ballroom screen. The hush in the room thickened, breathless. And in that moment, everything changed. For a split second, the ballroom felt suspended in time. The only sounds were the faint hum of the projector and a collective intake of breath as the familiar wedding slideshow gave way to a breaking news banner. I saw my image, a little grainy from the feed but unmistakably me, standing just behind Admiral Gregory at the Pentagon podium. The camera angle made me look taller, older, impossibly calm. My uniform was crisp, ribbons neat, my expression a careful mask of focus and control. There were a few scattered gasps, then a stunned silence. The news anchor's voice echoed. A Pentagon sources credit an unnamed lead analyst, callsign Echo, for isolating a digital threat hidden among millions of global signals. The operation, officials say, averted what could have become an international crisis. Across the room, I felt eyes snapping toward me, recognition dawning. Captain Walter stood up so suddenly his chair nearly toppled. "My God," he whispered, his voice carrying farther than he meant. "That's her. She's Echo." It was the kind of statement that changed everything. A cousin's voice broke through, incredulous and a little shrill. "Wait, she's been on TV this whole time?" The tension snapped. Glass shattered. I looked down to see my father's champagne flute in pieces at his feet. His face, so flushed with triumph just minutes ago, had gone grey and slack with disbelief. In seconds, the celebration unraveled. Some people looked at me with awe, others with embarrassment, a few with envy. Most were just shocked. For years, I'd been the quiet daughter, the one with the weird job, the one whose stories never made sense. Now, the truth was 10 feet high and impossible to ignore. My mother looked at me, truly looked, for the first time in years. There was something close to fear in her eyes, mingled with pride and a strange, searching confusion. Sarah, my new sister-in-law, was blinking as if she couldn't process what she was seeing. Blake just stared, his mouth half open, the golden child suddenly uncertain. And my father? I watched as the truth landed on him with the force of a physical blow. Every joke, every dismissive aside, every just cleaning for the seals, exposed and rendered ridiculous in the harsh light of reality. He tried to compose himself, but the mask of confidence he wore so easily had shattered. He looked to me, seeking something, reassurance, an explanation, maybe even forgiveness. But I felt nothing for him in that moment. Not anger. Not triumph. Just finality. It was over. I stood taller. For the first time in my life, I didn't shrink away from attention. I let the silence linger, the new reality soaking into every corner of the ballroom. The anchor continued. Your Operation Nightfall's success has been credited to a single analyst, working tirelessly for weeks to track what appeared to be random noise. Tonight, Admiral Gregory personally commended the work of Echo and her team. The Department of Defense reminds Americans that the greatest threats are often stopped by those whose names we'll never know. The feed cut to footage. Me at a bank of screens, pointing to a digital map, surrounded by a command group. I looked exhausted and determined. That was my world. That was the truth. Captain Walter, regaining composure, turned to the room. You all saw it. That's our Madison. She's the reason we're safe tonight. A low, reverent murmur ran through the guests. No one moved. It felt like the end of a movie, the audience not sure whether to applaud or run out in shock. I caught my father's eye. He tried to speak, but no words came. His hands shook as he reached for something to steady himself, finding only broken glass. I didn't look away. For once, I held his gaze, unwavering, letting him see everything he'd missed for years. I watched the world he built, all the stories, all the jokes, all the ways he'd kept me small, crumble in an instant. And I felt nothing but peace. I turned from him, scanning the room for the only person whose opinion truly mattered now. Captain Walter met my eyes and gave me a single, sharp nod. Echo, he said, his voice carrying the weight of a salute. That was all the acknowledgement I would ever need. The ballroom no longer felt like a celebration. In the lingering silence after the broadcast, guests milled around in uncertain clusters. Their conversations were low, careful, wary. The confident laughter and clinking of glasses were gone, replaced by sidelong glances in my direction and a wary respect that felt foreign and overdue. I could sense the shift most in my father. For as long as I could remember, Tom Carter was the gravitational center of every family event, every business dinner, every Sunday barbecue. Now, the confident salesman's mask was gone, and in its place was a pale, aging man who seemed to have lost his compass. He shuffled toward me, hesitating as though approaching a stranger. His mouth opened and closed, words struggling to form. Madison, But there was nothing he could say that would fit the moment. No quick joke, no grand gesture. All that bravado, that certainty, had evaporated in the space of a news broadcast. For a heartbeat, I considered reaching out, offering comfort, maybe even forgiveness. But I realized that was no longer my role. I didn't owe him an explanation for my life. What I owed, to myself, was honesty, and finally, boundaries. Instead, I simply shook my head. Just enough for him to understand. It's too late. His shoulders slumped. I watched as the realization settled over him. He'd lost something he'd never truly valued until now. My mother approached, her face tight with worry and confusion. Madison, why didn't you tell us? As she whispered, her voice trembling. I looked at her, searching for anger or disappointment in myself, but finding only a weary acceptance. Would it have made a difference? I asked quietly. She didn't answer. She looked away, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. Blake and Sarah hovered nearby, their earlier confidence deflated. Blake tried to muster a joke. I guess you really do more than clean up after the seals, huh? But his voice cracked, and the attempt died on his lips. For years, I'd craved their approval. Now, I felt nothing but relief at no longer needing it. Guests gradually gathered their things, offering awkward farewells, some whispering congratulations, others apologizing for their ignorance. I accepted each with grace, my head high, refusing to step back into the shadows. As the last guests filtered out, Captain Walter lingered near the exit. He approached, his bearing crisp despite his age. He looked at me with a respect I'd rarely received outside my workplace. I always knew you were sharp, Madison, he said quietly. But what you did tonight? That took courage. Don't let anyone make you feel small again. His words lingered with me long after he left. They were more meaningful than any family compliment I'd ever received. I stepped outside into the chilly Chicago night, the city's lights glittering against the dark sky. For the first time, I felt completely free of the weight of expectation. My phone buzzed, another secure message. Congratulations. Full debrief at 0800. Echo, you did good. I allowed myself a small, genuine smile. In my world, respect was earned, not assumed. I hailed a cab and watched the city blur by, the night air cleansing the last traces of humiliation. For years, I'd compartmentalized, soldier by day, invisible daughter by night. Now, I was whole. Back in my hotel room, I sat by the window and watched the first hints of dawn break over Lake Michigan. A quiet sense of peace settled over me, as if the city itself was acknowledging this new chapter. I realized, finally, that I had nothing to prove. Not to my father, not to my family, not to anyone but myself. The girl who had once hidden at the edges of family photos, waiting to be noticed, was gone. In her place was a woman who understood her own worth and was no longer afraid to show it. Chicago at sunrise is a city in transformation. The first light on the river surface, the rattle of the L train, the quiet rush of commuters starting their day, it felt like a city waking up to possibility. That morning, it felt like I was waking up too. I checked out of the hotel early, suitcase in hand and uniform carefully packed. The lobby staff, who'd seen hundreds of wedding parties come and go, gave me a knowing smile and a polite, "Congratulations, Lieutenant." I smiled, not correcting them. Some labels didn't matter anymore. My flight back to DC was uneventful, just a blur of sky and coffee and military dispatches. But stepping off the plane at Reagan National, I felt the shift inside me. Here, in the quiet urgency of the capital, I was Echo. No longer the oddity, not the background character in someone else's story, but a leader. A person with purpose. When I walked into the operations center, there was a ripple of recognition. Analysts nodded with respect, my new team lead Ben offered a high five, and Commander Ross gave me a rare but genuine smile. He pulled me aside for a quick debrief. "You did more than just spot a threat," he said, his voice low. "You changed the playbook, Echo." Intelligence is as much about intuition as it is about algorithms, and you have both. Take the weekend, get some rest. Monday, you're running the next mission brief. The words sent a thrill through me, not because I craved power, but because I'd finally found the place where my voice mattered. Later that day, my new team gathered in the break room, collapsing into chairs with energy drinks and takeaway sushi. The atmosphere was easy, genuine, full of the kind of dark humor that only comes from long nights and shared steaks. Ben grinned at me. "So, Chief, do we finally get to know your real name now, or are we still going by call signs?" The team laughed. "I'll tell you if you can crack my passphrase," I shot back, raising an eyebrow. It was a kind of teasing I'd never gotten from my own family, a camaraderie that was earned, not inherited. In that room, I realized I wasn't alone anymore. These were the people who'd sit beside me through the worst nights, who would notice if I was struggling, who respected what I brought to the table, not because I was a Carter, but because I was Echo. We shared gallows humor, inside jokes, and a language that no one outside this world could understand. This was my new family, built not on blood or obligation, but on trust, competence, and the belief that what we did truly mattered. That night, as I walked home through the cold, clean air, I passed by the Jefferson Memorial. I stopped and let myself breathe in the sense of history and purpose. I pulled out my phone and found an old message from my father, something about an open invitation at a Sunday dinner, written long before the wedding. I considered replying, just to say I was all right. But then I realized I didn't need to. He would come to terms with who I was on his own timeline, or maybe never. And that was okay. The next morning, I stood at my window, watching a C-17 cargo plane sweep across the sky. I thought about my mother, my brother, the way my family had always measured worth in the language of sales and status. I knew now, my worth was measured in different currency. My world was data and decision, risk and reward, failure and the quiet victories that would never make the news. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. Monday arrived. As I walked into the command center, a plaque had appeared beside my door. Echo, Division Lead Analyst. The title felt like a correction, not just a promotion. For years, I'd led from the shadows. Now, it was official. I looked around at my team, not just colleagues, but the family I'd chosen, and felt the kind of pride that wasn't loud or boastful, but deep, strong, and unshakable. I was finally home. The weeks after the wedding were a blur of 12-hour shifts, classified briefings, and the constant background hum of new threats emerging from the data sea. If anyone at headquarters still whispered about the TV broadcast, I never heard it. Here, gossip didn't matter. Only performance did. I was in my new office late one Friday, coffee gone cold, a threat matrix glowing on the screen, when my government email pinged with a personal message. It was from my father. Subject: Your brother's anniversary. The body of the email was a jumbled paragraph, half apology, half bravado. Maddie, I never really understood what you did. I know now it was important. I'm proud, even if I don't always show it. Blake and Sarah want to have you over for their first anniversary next month. Family should stick together. Let's move forward. For a moment, the old ache stirred in my chest, the one that wanted his recognition, his affection, his understanding. But then I realized I didn't need it anymore. He was offering a gesture, maybe even a form of peace, but it wasn't the currency I valued now. I closed the email, pausing for a breath before deliberately moving it to the archive. I had work to do. That weekend, I met up with Ben and a few others from my team at a tiny Vietnamese restaurant hidden behind a laundromat in Arlington. The kind of place you only knew about if you'd spent long hours working the night shift. We laughed, argued about the best kind of pho, swapped stories of close calls and almost missed clues. These people knew what I was capable of. They'd seen me at my best and my worst. Their respect was the only validation I needed now. Later that evening, as I walked home along the Potomac, I called my mother for the first time since the wedding. She answered on the second ring, a little breathless, as if she'd been waiting. Madison. I wasn't sure if you'd want to talk. I do, I said softly. We talked about ordinary things at first, the weather in Chicago, the neighbor's new puppy, Blake's latest sales record. But eventually, she asked, Are you happy? I surprised myself by answering honestly. I am, Mom. For the first time, I really am. She was quiet a long moment. I'm sorry if I ever made you feel like you weren't enough. The words caught me off guard, gentler and more direct than anything she'd said in years. I know you did your best, I said. And I'm okay. I really am. We said goodbye, a little lighter, a little closer than before. Not everything could be repaired, but some bridges could still be built. That Monday, I briefed the Joint Chiefs on a new pattern of cyber intrusions. The meeting was tense, technical, and utterly outside the world of car dealerships and wedding toasts. When it was over, Commander Ross caught me in the hallway. "You've come a long way, Echo." "Thanks, sir. You're making a difference. Here. Now. Don't forget that." It was the kind of validation that needed no fanfare. Back in my office, I looked around at the photographs on my desk, some from the academy, some from operations, one candid shot of my team laughing at some inside joke. This was my life now. It was real, it was valuable, and it belonged entirely to me. Occasionally, I would get updates from Chicago, Blake's dealership expanding, Sarah sending baby photos, my father's tone in emails becoming softer, less performative. He was trying. Maybe, in his own way, he always had been. But the difference now was that I didn't need to be the audience for his redemption. I replied to Blake, accepting the invitation to their anniversary dinner, on my terms, at a time that fit my schedule, with no need for fanfare or spectacle. I would show up not as the shadowy outsider, but as myself. Not for validation, but for closure. And if the jokes started again, I would meet them head on. If the silence grew awkward, I could let it stand. I wasn't afraid of being invisible anymore. I had found my own place, and I would never let anyone make me feel small again. Blake and Sarah's anniversary party was a smaller affair than their wedding. Just close family, a few friends, laughter echoing in their Lincoln Park condo. The decorations were simple, the menu potluck, and the mood warmer, more genuine than any Carter event I remembered. I arrived straight from a Friday at the Pentagon, changing into jeans and a navy sweater in my rental car, still carrying the afterglow of a successful week, 2 intercepted threats, a glowing commendation from Commander Ross, and a new analyst hired for my growing team. I rang the bell. Sarah answered, her baby girl on her hip. "Maddie, come in, please. We've missed you." The words felt real. Inside, Blake grinned at me, a little sheepish, but also proud. "Can you believe it? 1 year married, 1 baby, 2 new dealerships. I can barely keep up." He hugged me, and it wasn't awkward this time. In fact, the awkwardness that always hovered at Carter gatherings seemed to have faded. People talked to me, not just about me. No one joked about cleaning for the SEALs or secret missions. Instead, Uncle Jack wanted to know about cybersecurity. So, what do you actually do with those Navy computers? And my cousins listened without rolling their eyes. They'd kept mostly to the background at first, nursing a root beer, watching as I moved easily through the room. He looked older, not just greyer, but softer, smaller. He'd lost some of the bluster, and there was something almost apologetic in his smile. Dinner came and went. The laughter was honest, the conversation real. Eventually, Dad cleared his throat, tapping his glass for attention. "I just want to say something," he began, his voice uncertain. The room grew quiet. He looked at me, then at Blake, then back at the family. I spent a long time thinking success was about what people saw. Cars, houses, sales numbers, big parties. Turns out, I was wrong. Success, it's what you build when nobody's watching. It's what you give, not what you show. Maddie, I'm sorry I didn't get that sooner. I'm proud of you, not just for your work, but for who you are. For a moment, I saw the man he'd been when I was little, before pride and pressure turned him hard. I nodded, accepting it. Not as a daughter desperate for approval, but as a woman who finally understood her own worth. After dinner, Dad joined me on the balcony. The city glowed around us, quiet and alive. Are you happy, kid? He asked, voice rough. I am, I answered. And I hope you are too. He chuckled. Still figuring that out. But I'm trying. That was enough. As the night wound down, Sarah handed me her baby, my niece, eyes wide and curious. She wrapped her tiny fist around my finger, and something gentle and powerful settled in my chest. I saw in her the future, a new generation of Carters who might be raised to believe in more than surface success. Before I left, Blake hugged me again, whispering, "You always were the strongest of us." On the drive home, I thought about how far I'd come, not in miles, but in perspective. I remembered every joke, every time I'd been overlooked, every lonely moment at family gatherings. And I realized, none of it could touch me now. In my apartment back in DC, I sat by the window, city lights glittering like data points. My phone buzzed, a group text from my team, already joking about the next impossible mission. I smiled, answering with an inside joke only they would understand. Before bed, I took one last look at the only family photo I kept on my desk. In it, I wasn't standing at the edge, trying to fade away. I was at the center, not because anyone had put me there, but because I'd claimed the space for myself. I thought about all the quiet people like me, the daughters, sons, siblings, friends, who did hard things in the dark and got written off as a quiet, or strange, or not quite enough. And I wished they could feel, just once, what it was like to step into their own light. If you've ever felt invisible, remember, the quiet work you do matters. The world is built on what nobody sees. And your worth isn't measured by applause, it's measured by what you keep standing for, long after the noise dies down. In the silence, I found my peace. And in the shadows, I became my own kind of hero.